McIntyre, and Marla is our new administrative support manager. So the position that was previously filled by Melissa Kane-Varno now is filled by Marla. She joined us June 15th.
Welcome aboard, Marla.
So she's here today. She's going to learn how to take meeting minutes and do that. Marla, you don't necessarily have to be on video if you don't want to. So. Give folks a few more minutes. Robert and Brian Hagan both called to excuse themselves today, so they won't be joining us, but we still need a few more.
We have a quorum, right?
Are you asking me, Rick?
I am.
I actually don't know what number would constitute a quorum.
We have 8. We have 8 on the board, right?
We do.
So we need 5.
Okay.
I'm looking at 5 faces plus my own.
Okay. So, and I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So, call this July 6th meeting of the Cass County Human Services Board to order at 2 p.m. Ms. Secretary, will you please take roll?
Mr. Breitling, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Ellingsberg.
Here.
Ms. Sherling.
I'm here.
Mr. Hagan. Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Pollock.
Here.
Ms. Ferguson.
Here. And I see that Commissioner Breitling just joined us.
He's on mute yet, though.
Dwayne, it says you're here. You're muted.
This meeting is being recorded and/or transcribed.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and move through the agenda at this time. First on our agenda is approval for the board meeting minutes for the June 1st meeting. Do I have a motion regarding the past minutes?
So moved.
Rick, move. Second.
So all those approved say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion approved for the meeting minutes for June 1st, and that passes. Next in our agenda is a continued conversation of zone board composition, and I really don't have much to add here. I did draft and send out a form that I titled as the zone board. Well, let me find it here in my packet. The zone board member recommendations. And so the purpose of that form again is just to identify any potential future board members for targeted recruiting, should we choose to do that. And I drafted this and sent it out. I haven't had any responses yet, which is fine. Turns out I didn't set the link quite right, so I have fixed that. So I will resend the link afterwards. My one question about that was, does anybody have any feedback on the questions that were asked? I drafted this thinking about information that I might want as an individual when considering potential new members. But if someone has any additional feedback on what could be captured on this, I'd be welcome to hear that.
Earl?
Yes.
It's Glenn. Just to correct you, I did respond to your email. If you remember correctly, I could not get to the link because it wasn't available to me. Evidently, I was not a county employee and therefore could not access that part of the form. However, unlike your form, I chose rather than to give specific names because being retired now, I don't interact with that many groups. I provided organizations, which I felt were important for us to use. And I would like to see us do that as well. I mean, just because I don't have a name doesn't mean that I don't have, a suggestion as far as the type of individual that we should look.
Okay. And that's correct. You did send me some things in an email, and I did fix that link. So I'll make an update. I'll make some updates to that form before I resend that link out to include maybe not necessarily a specific individual, but an organization or group that they might represent.
Correct.
Perfect.
So kind of a different question. We've had some discussion on this, but I don't think we've ever come to a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
How many are we thinking we want on this board?
Yeah. So again, the cap is 15 members, including myself. The state requirements say that there needs to be at least one commissioner. But I believe in a previous conversation we had discussed having 3 commissioners. So I think
we talked about no less than 3, Pearl.
No less than 3. No less than 3. So in part of that, I think going back to the intent or the purpose of this board might be a deciding factor around the numbers of people. So when we look at what the duties of the board are in terms of, and I'm just going to pull my document that talks about the duties of the board, and I sent that out a couple months ago, and it can be resent again, but excuse me for 1 minute. So it says Chapter 50-1.2 County Social Service Boards, which was provided to me by Jonathan Alm at the state, who's one of the members of the state legal department. When it talks about the duties of the Human Service Zone Board, it says, for instance, provide information to the department relative to the community needs of the Human Service Zone residents and advocate to meet those needs. And then there was review services and programs provided by the Human Service Zone and make periodic recommendations for improvement in services, programs, or facilities, and aid and assist in every reasonable way to efficiently coordinate and conduct human service activities within the Human Service Zone by private as well as public organizations. And they have a few other elements on there, but those 3, I think, kind of set the stage for having, members of our community with this representation of individuals from our county, and then the cultural subgroups within our county, and, obviously commissioners and other individuals. So when I think about the board from the perspective, providing that information, advocating, reviewing services and programs to make sure that they meet the zone's needs, and to aid and assist in the coordination of human services, that almost makes sense to have a few more representatives than potentially 8, because we want representation that mirrors the demographics, I guess, of our county, for lack of a better term. And so, because I think less things will potentially need to be voted on, or less decisions would be made, having more individuals as representatives of our community could be beneficial. But then again, we don't have to have 15 people to do that effectively either. So I guess the long answer to your question, Rick, is I don't have a recommendation about the number.
Right. So I'm curious if some of the commissioners have a recommendation, since we're going to be the ones approving board members, right?
Yeah.
So this is Commissioner Pollock speaking. I'm very comfortable with the present configuration that we have, and I'm not motivated to add a bunch of names. Not that I'm opposed to it, but I'm comfortable with the way that we're doing it.
Mhm.
You know, I could just,
This is Chad.
Hey, Chad.
I guess I wouldn't mind seeing one or two people added, like a legislator, especially the folks that are maybe not our advocates. I guess I've always used the Koppelmans. Colonel, you're not aware of this, but generally speaking, they're anti-local, they're conservatives, quote unquote, but they're anti-local government, they're anti-social services, anti-lots of things. So having them involved, I think would be an amazing thing because they'd be educated quickly as to the fact we actually do pay attention to the budget. We do pay attention to your needs, our customers' needs, our neighbors' needs. And I think that would get them more connected. And again, I don't know if we turn them into advocates per se, but I would rather have some naysayers in the rooms rather than just sort of preaching to the choir and us harmoniously singing along. And then I wouldn't mind a member or two of the community as well. So I could see adding 2 to 3 names without any objection from me. So just my thoughts. I don't think we need 50, but a couple more would be more than palatable to me.
Okay.
I would just add also, I'm a little confused because we're just getting this rolling.
Mhm.
What kind of influence this board will really have down the road? You know, and I hesitate to use the word power, but I mean, in the past, you know, budgets and everything went through the county commission. So this is a whole new thing for us. Don't like to sit on boards where I'm, you know, have absolutely, you know, spend all kinds of time and it's all for naught. And I can think of at least one right now Cass County participates in, and we look at the budget and that's fine. There's even a vote taken to approve the budget, but we have really no say in the budget. You know, I'm thinking Cass Public Health. You know, so before we get a bunch of people engaged in this, you know, I think we should kind of figure out what exactly our role as a board is. I know it's just quoted what it is, but what it is in actuality. I would agree with both commissioners that I don't think we need to expand it greatly right now, but having some people that would have influence on it, which would be state legislators, I think that would be a good thing.
And I think your question is right in line with this request for zone board education, which again, I still don't have a set date for that zone board education. So I think that us just continuing to have an ongoing discussion as a board about what we would want that board to look like, knowing that there's obviously an opportunity for training and education between what a social services board used to look like and what a human services board will look like. That's a great opportunity. I think too, you know, I've continued to facilitate these discussions around what the zone board looks like and is configured like, but we don't have to rush into anything either. The individuals that are recommended through this form that I've built really are so we have an idea of how we would want to do targeted recruiting when we get to that point, but we're not making commitments to anybody. So, you know, if we facilitate these discussions now and kind of keep this in the back of our mind, when we get to that point, and maybe it's 3 months or 6 months that we sit down and we've had some training and we're feeling comfortable about, you know, the number of individuals we want to see on this board, and we have some clarity about the real purpose outside of 6 bullet points that are listed in a document about what the purpose of the board is, then we could move forward. But I personally am not in a rush, nor do I, you know, I hope that you guys don't feel like I'm rushing. I just really want to facilitate these conversations. So when we get to that point, we can take some action and we're just not putting things off. So.
Okay. This is Rick. Just some thoughts. Mary, I agree with what you said because I'm not exactly sure, you know, where this, you know, board is, what we're supposed to do exactly. And that's why the education thing, piece of that is so important before we make a lot of decisions. I know it's not finance, I know it's not budget, except the crazy part there is if we expand, you know, social services in Fargo significantly, guess who's responsible for space? you know, so that does impact our budget. So somewhere along the line, the commission still has to stay involved with, you know, what can we offer, what can't we offer, what can we afford as a county as far as space goes. I mean, I don't think they can force us to say, you need to add, you know, another 40,000 square feet. Maybe they can, I don't know how that works. But, you know, those are the concerns I have. That's why I think some of the commissioners need to stay on this board to, you know, at least pull in the reins once in a while to say, oh, time out, where are we going to put all these people? Because we don't have that space. Is the state going to pay for it? Is the county going to pay for it? You know, who's going to pay for this space? You know, so that's part of the issue that I would have. I agree with Chad, and you know, to get a legislator involved was important, I think. I saw that on a number of the other boards that you brought up. You shared with us, Pearl, that they had some legislators involved with those boards. I don't want 15. That was the reason for my question. I think, you know, get a big board that's on Wheatley, no one shows up, and then they're even less engaged. And that type of thing. So, but, you know, to have a few other community people on the board, I think would be good, is the intention. The other piece of that is that if we don't want too big of a board, and, you know, if we can agree that, you know, no less than 3 commissioners, maybe some of the commissioners want to drop off this board, make room for some community members, yet still have a say in what's going on in the board meetings, and again, to pull the reins in. So we need the education piece like you talked about before we make a lot of decisions. I like this idea of here's a sheet, make some recommendations, how we do it, people or organization. I think it's a good start. And I agree, we don't have to make any big changes right now. But I do think we have to kind of keep our eyes open for some good candidates. If we see, you know, talking to somebody said, hey, you'd be a good candidate on this board, like, would you be interested? But I don't think there's any rush.
I think, too, a dual purpose for this forum is we had talked about, we can have guests that present, you know, these connections to our community. And so even this forum could be used in that way to say some of these folks we might potentially want to recruit as permanent future board members, but maybe sometimes, or maybe some of these other folks we want to invite to participate like on a quarterly basis, because they do represent a specific group of individuals in our community. And so I think in that way too, it would be useful to say we should consider having someone from this organization or that has a background in this topic that really pertains to human services. So we could do that as well going forward. Let me see here. So if no one has any additional comments on or recommendations for changes to the form, I will update it and I will resend it after this meeting out to everyone. And again, just when you think of an individual or an organization that you think would be a good guest or good addition to the team at some undefined point in the future, feel free to jot it down. And what happens is this form links back and it creates a whole database for me to go through, and I have access to that. So it's really helpful to have those things come through on this form, because I sometimes lose emails. I won't lose yours, Glenn. I have it in a safe spot. I know where it is. The other thing, and we don't have to do anything with this today, but I wanted to give some advanced just notification on it. Another thing that we need to do with regards to the board based on this chapter 50-01 is that we need to elect a vice presiding officer and appoint a secretary. And so I just wanted to put that out there. I will, I'll add this to the next agenda for discussion, and then I would say in September maybe we could do that election and appointment. But I didn't want to sneak it up on anybody, so you could, you know, so you had time to think about it. And really, all the language says is the human services or the appointed member shall elect a vice presiding officer and appoint a secretary, and other officers as the Human Service Zone Board determines necessary. The Human Services Zone Director shall serve as the presiding officer. And that's all it gives me.
I would suggest perhaps that you wait until December to do that. That is after the elections, and that's also when we, if we're going to switch up our portfolio assignments, that's when we do that. It just might make more sense.
Okay, so in December or after December?
Well, in December is when we all sit down the first Monday of December and figure out who's going to sit on what committees as a group. The county commission does. So that just might make more sense.
Okay.
There's a couple of us that are on the ballot, so things can change.
True. Okay, well then I'll push that out even farther since we're close at this point, and only have a few more meetings. I'll push that out to January, so then everything can be finalized, because technically I think we would have our December meeting prior to your guys' December meeting, and so that wouldn't make sense to put it on December either.
What's the function of the secretary?
I wish that I could tell you that. I don't know.
Is it just to record the minutes?
Honestly, it doesn't give me any further definition other than you should appoint a secretary.
Does the secretary need to be a member of the board?
Say that one more time.
Does the secretary need to be a member of the board? Because we have a secretary appointed.
Yep.
Is this an officer of the board?
It doesn't. It does not.
It says just appoint a secretary, right?
Yep. It says just elect. They will elect of. I'm sorry. Let me get my. Appointed members shall elect a vice presiding officer and appoint a secretary. So I may need to ask for some clarity around the secretary piece, but I know that we already have one. So yeah, the language is pretty vague.
As a reminder, remember, not all 19 zones have the structure that we do. So my guess is that it's one of the members of the board. And that's followed by the fact, like I said, that they don't have, a full cadre of 200 or 160 staff. So
Yeah.
I think it's a logistical issue more than anything else.
Yeah, and probably with the dismantling of the county's social services boards and the formation of zone boards, they might have had multiple secretaries, so really picking that out, that's a really good point. I will follow up, though, and just ensure that the secretary doesn't have to be an appointed a member of the board, or a previously appointed member. Okay, so that's all I have for zone board composition. Is there any further questions or comments regarding that? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move to our operations report. And I'm going to provide just a few comments on various sections, and then I'll open things up for discussion. So under personnel, I wanted to inform the board that Chip Ammerman has resigned his position effective 7/15. And since March 16th, Mr. Ammerman has been temporarily filling the APS manager position and providing operational supervision for the APS and the intake departments. So, anyways, that's that update in personnel, and I hadn't included it because I was thinking about previous months, and that's happening this month, and I was not projecting forward. So There's that. And then under Adult Protective Services, that APS manager position will be vacant. However, the state is not going to approve to refill that position right now. And so I believe that future redesign is going to include some transition of management of APS to the state. And so they're not going to fill that manager position at this time. So it's essentially we don't have an APS manager anymore. So the APS staff will begin reporting to me. So for anything that falls under their social worker scope of practice, that will be managed by another, I will designate another social worker to oversee that, but all of their other personnel requirements, such as their performance reviews and their annual leave and such, will be managed by myself. And that will be effective on July 16th. And then moving down to the family services, in my review of our statistical report for family services, I had failed to make a couple of updates that Linda had provided to me. So there's a couple line items that talk about crisis case management, and that actually should be listed now as in-home case management, and that was effective in May. And there are those line items with crisis case management and children in crisis case management were our biggest jumps in terms of numbers. And so those changes in numbers are actually a reflection of the definition of who is served under in-home services, and not necessarily this massive jump in cases. So I had followed up with Linda about that because I was a bit concerned to see those numbers. So that's a part of the redesign efforts, is there's crisis case management has become this in-home case management, and then the numbers reflected on our reports for May have a broader definition of what in-home constitutes, and so it's picked up some additional cases that now fall under that definition. So those numbers aren't as inflated as they seem. They're people that we've already been serving in a different capacity. And then the total CAS custodial children served, the number for April was misreported, and so it was actually 207 children in custodial care in April, and so it looked like there had been a jump in like 50 children between April and May. That is not accurate. It was 207 in April, it's 196 in May, and so we've actually had a decrease of 11 children in custodial care between April and May. So that's a good reflection. I don't have any additional comments for economic assistance. With Mr. Ommerman's resignation for intake, those staff will also be reporting to me for all of their personnel related needs, and that will be effective in July 16th. And those are the additional comments that I had that I wanted to put out there. So I will now turn the time over.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So question, these changes without having a manager in place and you taking over those positions, is that going to affect the efficiency or delivery of service in any way?
I do not anticipate any operational impact there. I've already met with the APS staff. They gave me a crash course in APS the other day, and it's something that from my previous work I'm fairly familiar with. So really it will be the addition of 4 APS staff that will report to me and 3 intake staff. So no, I don't anticipate that there will be any operational related issues based on a change in management. Did that answer your question, or was there, I feel like there's
No,
a
I think-
component that I missed.
Answered it. You know, I guess I still have in the back of my mind a question as a board, if that was a concern for you, what kind of influence this board would even have on, you know, potentially, you know, influencing a different outcome for you. It's still a confusion to me.
And I don't have an additional answer to that. I think that, well, I guess just kind of as a segue, if things were to get to the point where it felt like we were having an operational impact based on the change in supervision, I would definitely be comfortable going back to Sarah Stoltz and Human Resources on the state, at the state level, and advocating for that change. What they anticipate, from my knowledge, is that within a few months, at least APS will experience some redesign efforts. And that might be like centralizing intake for APS and having a regional supervisor versus having 19 supervisors across the zones. So there hasn't been a lot of clarity around that. But again, I don't anticipate anything that, without, you know, with collaboration with the team and the support of a social worker that's also a manager, that we wouldn't be able to handle well.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Earl, this is
Yes.
Glenn. I have a question for you that's related to that. Operationally, it may not have the impact, but my concern would be on your time and efforts. If we keep adding, or if the state declines to fill another position, how many supervision tasks can you take over before you're impacted? That would be my bigger complaint, would be that the state is taking this over without any regards to your workload.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I believe that this is going to be temporary. My current number of staff that I directly manage is five. So this will be, you know, an addition of 7, which will put me around 12. So in my mind, that's pretty manageable. When you start to, for me personally, when you get into the mid-teens or above for direct management, then I think it gets much more complicated. But I feel like on a short-term basis that this will be manageable. But I appreciate your concern. Again, I'm very comfortable going back to Sarah Stoltz and the state, and, you know, just advocating for my needs and being really clear about, you know, what's happening and the support that I need. And thus far, I think that they have been really supportive, especially of me as a new director, and all my questions and comments, and helping me find resources and things like that. So it's been a good experience working with the state up to this point.
As a reminder, remember the work you're taking on is saving the state $120,000 a year. That was part of our, I'm just being honest, that's part of our budget in CAS.
So you're telling me I should ask for a raise?
No, well, yeah, honestly, one of two things. Either ask for a raise or ask for a reapportionment of those dollars somewhere else, because those dollars are ours. They're not state dollars, they're our dollars. So whether they go to you, additional staff, whatever, we need those dollars incorporated into our budget somehow.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Are there any additional questions or comments around either the narrative or the numerical report that was provided for May?
Pearl, I have one question, and I don't know if it's even possible for you to answer it. And that is, you mentioned that the COVID-19 has had no real strong impact on the services that we provide, but how are our staff? Do we have any staff that have come down with the virus at this point, or are we sitting in pretty good shape as far as that and any backfilling that might have to happen?
Yeah, so currently my comment was really to say, operations have functioned pretty much as normal. When you look at that numerical report, we didn't have the really huge jump in numbers that we anticipated that we would have, especially in economic assistance. We didn't experience as low a numbers maybe as we would in our family services division based on children not being in close proximity as frequently to the mandatory reporters. So I think that, just as a sidebar, I think that speaks a lot to what the staff are doing. They're keeping up with the demand. Everybody's still working at the levels that they were prior to the coronavirus, so that's been really good. When you talk about the staff and how they're doing, we mobilized a lot of the staff to be able to work remotely. And I did survey the staff around that to just talk about how was their experience going. And so a lot of staff reported back that that's continued to work really well for them. I just asked people to share, what their personal benefit was or their perceived benefit. And I went through and did a rough calculation. And so a lot of people really appreciate the fact that they don't have to commute and they can get to work a little earlier and maybe finish a little earlier, and they have a little more work-life balance, and they have more dedicated quiet office time with fewer interruptions. On the flip side, working with technology remotely, as we've all even experienced in this meeting, can be a challenge at times when you don't connect as quickly as you want to. So overall, from that capacity, things are going well. We haven't called any of the staff back to the office that are currently telecommuting. As you know, we've continued to function by appointment only, which has worked really well. And I think, kind of as a segue into the second part of your question, like how is the staff doing health and safety wise? I think that's been the biggest indicator, or the biggest, not indicator, but probably the best thing that we've done in terms of limiting the exposure of staff to the public to reduce their risk of potential exposure, is that we continue to screen every person that comes in with a series of questions. We're documenting all those individuals that come in for contact tracing purposes. All of our staff that are continuing to do home visits in the community are documenting when they're going for contact tracing purposes. And so because of our good efforts there, we have maintained an overall very healthy staff. We have had some potential exposures. We have had some staff who have tested positive. And we've been able to react very quickly in terms of if they had been in the workplace. We've personally developed a very good relationship with Fargo Cass Public Health, who has screened every employee that's come through with a positive or potential exposure to clear them to come back to work. And really, just as an example, one of the individuals that did report positive had been telecommuting, and so their exposure was community related and had nothing to do with the office. So they weren't here before they were exposed, during the time that they were positive, and they continue to work from home. So things have gone really well in that capacity in terms of keeping just people, I think, healthy and safe and keeping their risk reduced, and feeling as comfortable as one possibly can, in the workplace at this point. So
I've got an unrelated question for you, Pearl.
Sure.
At one meeting we had, there was talk about a group of zone directors that may or may not meet or share ideas and thoughts? Have you had any interaction with that group?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Oh.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay. So I had one visit with the regional directors, so the Agassiz Valley zone and the RSR zone, this Region 5 group. We've met in person before. I have weekly telephone calls with all of the zone directors across the state, and we meet, independently as a group with no other individuals. The state has then facilitated a lot of zone director related meetings for, especially around COVID-19 or continued redesign efforts. And then the zone directors that are meeting via phone now meet on a regular basis in person, which obviously has been stopped due to COVID. And so we've had a discussion about potentially resuming those meetings in September, I believe, given that it's appropriate to do so and a venue can be found for adequate social distancing. So yeah, I've had the opportunity to kind of mingle with most people, usually virtually or telephonically, but.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more comment from me. If we're supposed to be advocating certain things as a zone board, and I'm not sure how you take this to the state, I'm assuming that's your job to do so.
I would guess.
Okay. What I'm hearing is that at least a number of board members are anticipating and looking forward to this education. So if they want to make something a priority for the zone boards, the education piece would be great. So I think you can safely pass that along. That's of interest to this board.
Yeah, and I have done that, and I will continue to do that. There had been some conversation about, what are they called? INDACO? Is that the North Dakota Association of Counties?
Yep.
Got to get all my acronyms right here. About whether, because they have an upcoming conference this fall, I believe, and whether that would be an appropriate time to provide that training. But again, nothing's been solidified that's been passed down to the zone directors. And we're not the only county, we're not the only zone that has been asking for it. There are a number of zones that are interested in having this, I think, for the same purpose as just so we can move forward and fulfill our purpose as a zone board. So, but yes, I'm happy to advocate for that again.
Earl, this is Glenn.
Yes.
I understand you're talking about a meeting, but I don't see why the state can't work towards some virtual training. I mean, there's no reason that we have to get together. We can do it over Zoom or team meeting just like we're doing today. I think it's bothersome that the state has not come more quickly to the point of training the area boards. And I think that I would go a little bit farther than Rick and say that our board is strongly encouraging them to do some virtual training or to at least develop some training. It seems like they're just not stepping up to the board.
And I could just add, the conference you're talking about is not until October.
Okay.
And that is, for county employees, county commissioners and auditors and so on and so forth, not necessarily other zone board members. Mm-hmm. So, I'm sure that would be a great venue for some of this, but we want to make sure that they're remembering that not everybody on the zone board is a county commissioner, and now that we've expanded it, I would expect that would be even more so. October is getting a little late, and that may end up being virtual anyway. So
those are both good points. I appreciate that.
So what are some of the challenges that you're having with these days?
Personally or
Professionally, with your job?
Obviously, there's a really steep learning curve. My background in healthcare, specifically in the healthcare model that I worked in, provided me with a lot of exposure to, the social needs of individuals within the community, and the provision of human services in conjunction with medical services to provide care for people holistically. That being said, having that foundation of, we treat people with dignity and respect, and all of those core elements that go into the delivery of good human services. Above and beyond that, the learning curve about this is how we provide human services through economic assistance, and this is how we provide human services through adult protective services and through the child welfare system. There's just so much to learn about that, but it's been going well. Linda Dorf has been really excellent in just keeping me up to speed on the changes that are happening with state redesign, with the Family First Act, with the state's, it's called the practice model, so it's how we provide child welfare and make decisions within the child welfare system. She's been a really great partner. Sydney Schock obviously has given me multiple crash courses in economic assistance and the various services that we provide through that. I have been working with an organization called ALEA, which we're part of their cohort, and they do a lot within the child welfare system. And so it's been good to have those. They have very graciously provided me with a coach essentially within that has expertise in child welfare in a jurisdiction that was very similarly sized to ours. And so when I encounter procedural questions that aren't really about the process, I can go to her and say, how might we handle a decision like this? Or what feedback can you give me? And then obviously I've tried to build connections with the state representatives that we have and just ask a lot of questions and be really open. But it is the perfect example of the analogy of drinking from a fire hose. Like, I feel like there's so much information coming at me all the time. And I really have to say thank you to everybody who I've asked the same question to probably 10 times, and they still answer it like it's the first time I asked, and they don't give me grief about it. That's probably my the biggest thing, And there's definitely some interesting components, like on January 1st, when the zones changed, the regional representative that we have used to make the decisions about adoptive placements. So she would approve the adoptive options for families, for children and families. But that's something that falls on me now. And so that's something obviously that I take very, very seriously. And so, and that has, they're kind of stressful situations when you think about being someone who has the final say about where a child or a group of children may go to spend the rest of their lives or their young lives. And so I've tried to have good contact with the regional representative, Linda Jagger, who used to do that. And we have a team that works through those things together as a group, and the case managers, and that's given me a good opportunity to get to know some of the individuals who do our CPS and case management work on a daily basis. So, and then just getting to know everybody, and that's been a really big challenge in light of the fact that, there's not very many people that I see on a daily basis. So it's been difficult, I think, to build relationships when you have to rely on everything being virtual. So that's been a challenge. Those would probably be my top 3. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Well, does anybody else have any questions or comments related to the operations report or just anything else that's happening right now? Okay. Well, hearing no further questions or comments, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Right. Our meeting is adjourned at
Yep.
2:49 p.m.
Thank you.
Everyone. It was good to
Thanks.
see you.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Have a safe and prosperous board meeting.
This meeting is no longer